So thank you everyone for joining us today, taking some of your precious time to hopefully learn some stuff and make some connections with both the information that I'm going to be sharing and with others in this group and beyond. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen to show some of the images that are going to help understand this content. So just to get started, I would love to know from you, what brought you here today? So in the chat, go ahead and let us know why you signed up for this, why you have taken some of your precious time and resources to come together to learn more about Sincerity's role in leadership. I want to make sure that I am getting you what you came here for. So Caroline, are you seeing things coming into the chat? I'm not seeing the chat.
Yes, I am. So what we are seeing so far is to be a more authentic leader, to improve my own leadership skills, participate in positivity, to recognize authentic leadership in myself and others. Someone was just intrigued by the title, Authentic versus Sincere, and always looking for new tools to improve my leadership capabilities. So lots of good things. My New Year address to staff was all about being real, being open to vulnerability, and embracing equity of voice. So great things.
Okay. Yeah, good. Yes, let's talk about the distinction between authenticity and sincerity. That is a really good place to start. And I am just going to own my identity as a word nerd right out of the gate. I feel like naming things is really powerful, and understanding the words that we choose to communicate concepts and ideas is vital for leadership. So we're going in here, we're going to cover, how we got sincerity, what that word is and where it came from into the English language. We're going to talk about the role of fear in sincere leadership. As Emily said, that's kind of my jam. And this is something that is left out of a lot of leadership conversations, is the emotional context of what we're doing. Then we're going to talk about some ways that humans thrive. A lot of us are in survival mode right now, and that is exactly right. That's exactly where we want to be. And when we can start imagining how to thrive beyond survival, that is going to help us survive too. And we're going to talk about some really practical actions to sincerely lead. I love talking theory and ideas, but really when it comes down to it, leadership is a lot about changing behavior and getting people to do pretty much what they want to do anyway. So let's dive in. Sincerity came to us back in the 14th century, and was initially referring to religious matters. So the English-speaking world that this word arrived in had a lot to do with this guy. There was a lot of upheaval in England at this time. Henry VIII, in addition to marrying and killing a lot of women, he was also executing a lot of other people. So there was a lot of, frankly, domestic terrorism going on that resulted in what was called a pilgrimage of grace, which is an amazing euphemism for basically a domestic revolt. He had severed England from the rest of the world, the quote unquote civilized world at this point, by leaving the Catholic Church. This upset a lot of people and was very confusing. People didn't have that center point to refer to anymore. The monasteries that were a source of a lot of stability, resources for families, for communities, were closed, as well as he was fighting, this is interesting, the Italian War, in which they were fighting France. I'm not sure why it was called the Italian War. I think the Italians were involved in it too, but there is just a lot of stuff going on. And so the desire for something clear and not spun. So freedom from falsification is that desire to engage with conversation and the world in a way that does not have what we would call spin. So to get at that, I'm sharing a potentially provocative set of images from here in Seattle. This is obviously a drone view of a block in Seattle that had been occupied during the protests last summer. It got a lot of national news. I've heard from people across the country that pretty much everyone assumed that all of Seattle was a war zone, which has never been the case. But this was a very intense situation. And part of what came out of this was a lot of creativity, including this mural that was painted by people occupying this zone for a number of weeks. And this was just spontaneous expression of creativity and values. So what is interesting is that this particular image is the official image. So there's the mural was repainted. There's now a border around it. This area is now opened up to, something that resembles normal occupation and activities. But when it actually emerged, it looked more like this. This was during the occupation of the zone. And what is really impressive for me is the people that are in this image that are not in the sanctioned image. So thinking about what is false, is this false or is the previous image false that is empty except for a very pretty and organized image? So that's something to consider, that sincerity is not necessarily pretty. Sincerity is not necessarily what the quote unquote powers that be would say is okay. So this is risky. When you're thinking about being sincere, it can be pretty scary. So some things to think about as you are turning towards sincerity and wanting to embrace this as part of your leadership practice is, as the fear comes up, which is if you're doing this, it probably will, think about why sincerity is difficult. Why haven't you been doing this already? And there's a good reason. It's not because you don't want to. There's probably some things that are in the way that's making it difficult. What could being sincere cost you? This is real. People have lost jobs, lost colleagues, lost income due to sincere expressions. So that is something really you want to consider. And how is your ego showing up through all of this? So we're going to get to ego more just now. So ego, as was communicated in some of the promotional material, is really related to this inner child that we heard a lot about back in the day, of getting in touch with your inner child. A lot of what our inner child is our ego. So she is very precious. We do not want to be without ego. We need her. She deserves our attention. She's there for a reason. She makes us unique, and she makes us kind of vulnerable. She loves cookies. So when you get, those ego strokes, when someone pays you a compliment, when you get attention that is positive, those are the kind of cookies that your ego really loves, and she will stop jumping up and down and like acting out when she gets her cookies. She wants to drive. So anyone who's been around small children in cars knows that they want to get behind the wheel and operate all the gadgets. That is not what they should do. They will get mad if you try to get them out of the driver's seat, but really, they should not be driving. So too with our egos. We definitely want our egos in the car with us, but they should not be driving. The ego is very much about attention and about wanting to feel unique in the world. And that should not be driving our actions. It's important, but not something that should be driving us. So to speak more around that, we're going to talk about sincerity and identity. So in the US particularly, and in a lot of the westernized world, we have this individual identity. Americans are very proud of going it alone, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps, which assumes that we have boots or arms that are capable of pulling on boots, that we can, face the challenges and overcome. You will, a lot of fear conversations, books, etc., talk about fighting fear or getting through it or ignoring it, and to take on the challenge on your own. This is not how success happens for humans. In a lot of the world, there is a collective identity that is often derided or actually vilified in the US when people identify with a group, whether that group is their family, their community, or their nation. They will do what is best for the group rather than what is best for them as an individual. And they will also, the group will also come together to support a person being successful. So collective identity and individual identity has a lot to do with sincerity. So when you are sincere and you have removed spin from your language and your behavior, you become more connected with the people that you're working with or that you're working around. And this sort of identity brings us toward the concept of we leadership, which is informed a lot by the platinum rule. A lot of people haven't heard of the platinum rule. I'm doing my best to emphasize this because the golden rule, for all the positives that it can hold, is very colonizing. So the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, basically says that you are the standard. And so treat everyone as if they were you. Well, a lot of us aren't you. So a better way to work with people, everybody, is treat others as they wish to be treated, which is a lot more difficult because it requires investigating how other people want to be treated and understanding that where they're coming from and what they desire to move forward is unique from what you desire or want to move forward. So that's something that can be pretty huge, but it is required for we leadership, so moving together with a group rather than the more dictatorial stance of command and control. So getting into some practical aspects of this practice of sincerity in leadership is a new relationship with time. I was talking with a colleague yesterday that one of the strange sideways gifts of the pandemic is a new relationship with time, where we are coming to understand that immediacy and importance don't necessarily go together. So time is being experienced more and more in sort of a taffy sort of stretch of experience, due to all sorts of new strictures on how people are interacting. So in this time, and using time as an experience, you want to collect experiences with your team, and you want to do it slowly. Taking your time to get to know people rather than jumping in and forcing a lot of team bonding or I remember when I worked at a very large tech firm here in Seattle that a lot of folks are familiar with. We would have team activities quarterly where we would do something like go to the circus or go on a tour of Seattle. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the work that we were doing. It was like a little tiny vacation. And I don't know that it did a lot to support our work. In fact, some people felt very stressed taking a day away from work to do this. So collecting experiences with your team doesn't need to be about, getting the report done or making sure that all the emails are responded to, but it should touch back on the mission of the work that you are trying to accomplish. So if your organization is about supporting people in poverty, perhaps your team activity would be volunteering outside of your organization to help with an aspect of support for a community that you wouldn't usually do, but could bring some creative ideas back with you. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about collecting experiences with your team, and also having conversations that go deeper than tactical or weather checking. Like, how are you? I'm fine. Something a little beyond that. Not that you need to share, your medical history or what the latest shenanigans of your sister, but something that is more connective than weather checking. You want to be intentional about this. So again, tip it back to the reason that you are all together. You are all together working on something for a reason. And usually that reason is fairly large. When a lot of organizations, particularly when you are a new leader, a new supervisor, you will look to those who have gone the way before or to experts that have been put up in your awareness as someone that has done it well. Those are good to look at, but I want to encourage you to avoid just taking whole cloth what worked for them and apply it to you and your team. Getting ideas and continuing to learn is definitely a good way to go, but you probably have all had the experience of going to a team meeting or an organizational gathering where the leader says, we're going to adopt lean processes and be prepared. We're going to, apply this across the board and everybody's gonna, be better for it. And then you're walking away talking with your colleagues and say, yeah, this is another fad. We're not going to do anything different. It'll fade in a few weeks, possibly months. So just understand that if you're being sincere, you're having conversations with your team and getting to know them and understand what helps them work best together to accomplish what the work has been set before you. And you can share what you're learning as far as like some work frameworks that you're learning about. And you can experiment with it. But again, you want to do it with your team, not to your team. And you want to allow for a little chaos and surprise. This is part of the creative process. If you are in control of everything, you will not be surprised. You will get exactly what you've always gotten, because that is what you know and that's what you can control. So it is wonderful and a little scary when work goes strange. And of course, you're all going to have different levels of acceptable levels of risk as far as this is concerned. If this, if the chaos gets to the point that it is interfering with the work getting accomplished in a large fashion, that is not good. Surprises that negatively impact your financial situation or someone's personal ability to do the work, those are not good. So you want to gauge your own acceptable level of risk for this. And I want to encourage you to start flexing in a way that allows some room for some surprises, because they can be really good too. As the leader, as a supervisor, you want to make sure that you make and maintain healthy, transparent boundaries. So often I think about our cells in our bodies. They are surrounded by semi-permeable membranes that keep out some things and let other things in. So you don't want to just block off and be the boss to your team constantly, where they're afraid to talk with you about things that are happening for them. And you don't want to be their friend. Honestly, as a supervisor, you are even if you are promoted from within this team, you cannot be friends with them, because that is a very different relationship and it can get very muddy very fast and compromise both professional and personal relationships and abilities to continue to work together. So consider what a healthy boundary is for you and your team, and make sure that that's transparent, that you are very overt and sincere and not making a spin about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So sincerity has a lot to do with intentions, and we know that intentions are different than impact. So when we think about clean, genuine intentions, think about that nice flow, clarity, but we've got other influences that are coming into it. So there are going to be circumstances, that are going to be people, there are going to be days that you're just having a day and you can't bring it like you would usually. Know that that is all good and part of life, even when it doesn't feel good. Being sincere means surfing through all of these ripples of influence while continuing to be water, to stretch that metaphor a little further. Being clean and genuine does not mean that you are independent in operating in a vacuum where nothing else touches you. You can have every intention of a particular way of working with your team that is sidelined by the latest policy or global pandemic that completely changes what you had planned. So just know that, yes, intentions are very important for sincerity, but sincerity does not mean that it is flawless, and that mistakes are part of the freedom from falsification, as well as being very sincere in enacting your clear and healthy boundaries. So that is very quickly a lot of information, and I don't know if questions have emerged through this big download, but I am open to hearing questions now, and we can go back to different slides and different aspects of the conversation from before. So Caroline, do we have questions that have already arrived?
Yes, we do have one question. So that first question would be, do women have a natural bent towards individual or collective?
Research has shown that women tend toward a collective identity. Again, any individual person is going to defy any generalization. I will just put it that way, probably including that one. This is the challenge of recognizing women leading is the dominant paradigm of patriarchal leadership that men have exercised does not recognize the kind of leadership that does not have someone out in front, that raises many boats, so to speak. So yes, the research has shown that women tend to be more collective, and we have all grown up in a culture that is very individualistic. So that's another one of those cross-current ripple effect sort of things. What may be natural to you may have been trained out of you, and or what you are most comfortable with may not be what is supported in your particular situation.
We have a few more questions, but there's a couple of comments too that I think would be interesting to make note of. So one was saying here from Martha, I was wondering about the platinum rule versus being the boss and needing to let a person know that they can't have what they want or do what they've been doing. If you're free to comment on that.
Yeah, that is a really good comment. And so treating people as they wish to be treated also, yeah, and I'm thinking about like different age groups as well. When someone asks you to be a certain way with them, so say I appreciate being treated as someone who cannot make decisions for myself. Like, just tell me what to do so I can do it. I have encountered this a lot in the workplace where someone's role is evolving in such a way that now they need to be more proactive than what they have experienced previously. And there's just a whole lot of resistance. It's like, I have been doing this job for so many years, and if you just tell me what you need me to do, I will do it. But that's not the role anymore. So that is a conversation about how the work is evolving, and treating this person with respect and listening to her as she goes through the pain of the change that she's experiencing, and understanding that there is fear present for her, that, you know, in a very real sense, her position is under threat. She is under threat because the work that is demanded of her is not something that she potentially is prepared to do. So this is an opportunity for conversation, which again, the platinum rule will bring you into conversation every time. Whereas the golden rule, there's a lot of assumptions. So thank you for that comment. That's a really good one.
Yeah. Our next question is, how do we gauge how risky it is to take on this approach? Are there any markers that signal how tolerant a culture is to this approach?
Yes. The primary marker is trust. how much trust is present in your team, how much trust is present across the organization. This is something that I cannot tell you particularly how trust is showing up, but you know, if you can trust that someone will follow through, that someone will show up in the way that they have told you, and that they're not going to be gossiping and undermining the team's efforts. So the level of trust in the team and the organization is your primary marker for how much risk you can tolerate, as far as like making changes or dropping some shields that will bring sincerity to the fore. And also, I just want to take a moment. We kind of skipped over the authenticity, sincerity thing. So I want to say we've talked a lot about what sincerity is. Authenticity is basically being real, being who you are all the time. And that's not necessarily a good thing in the workplace. So if who I am is someone who is very loud and creative, and I don't really want to like marshal my language in a different way than I would with my friends, being that uh, person at work is not necessarily a good thing. And also, not everybody is a positive member of a team. So somebody can be authentically brilliant and authentically real and be a terrible person. Like, you can authentically be a terrible person. Being authentic is just not having uh, an act, so to speak. It's not necessarily a good thing.
Oh, thank you for that. So we have a few more questions. So keep them coming, everybody. But from Karen, curious about your feedback on friendship dynamics changing at work. How do you smooth transitions of being promoted and now have those colleague friends now reporting to you? It's a great question.
Yes, this happens so often. It happened to me very early on in my career, and quite frankly, I flubbed it horribly. Um, so when you, most organizations will promote top performers into supervisory roles without any training or understanding that supervision is a unique skill set from whatever top performance you are doing. So if you're the top salesperson and you're promoted to supervising salespeople, you cannot sell to your team. That is a completely different skill set. And what happens too often is um, new supervisors will continue to try to be top performers and outperform their team. And the team will be looking to this person for leadership and operating parameters and vision. Uh, and they're not getting anything. They're just getting pushback and competitiveness. So when you are promoted from within your team, so you are now supervising people that were formerly your colleagues, and maybe you used to go out for, Friday get-togethers or, other kinds of socializing each other's home, I would recommend just being really transparent and saying, look, I am in a different power position now. I have to learn a different job to do. And quite frankly, part of being your supervisor is no longer being your friend. That is something that when you accept this promotion, you have to accept that that is going to change your relationship with your team and should go into your consideration about whether or not you are going to accept the promotion. It always comes with more money, of course, but there's a reason for that. And also, I highly recommend, whether your organization offers it or not, seeking out education and training in supervision and leadership. Whether you have been or want to be promoted into a supervisory position, it is vital to understand that supervision is a unique skill set. I'm going to keep saying this, from whatever it was that brought you to the attention that got you promoted.
That's a great question. So we have, I have a few more. This one came in from Tangela. So it's a two-part question based from a comment. I've seen matriarchal leadership from women, which can be as unhealthy as a patriarchal. Can you speak to this dynamic? And then the second part is the platinum rule by default can't be ego-driven, right?
So I'm going to take them in reverse because the first one's a little more simple. Platinum rule, yes, cannot be ego driven, and you want your ego in there. So when you're talking with someone to find out how they want to be treated, your unique ability to meet that request or that situation is where your ego comes into play. But it is not, your ego is not coming in to say, I am this great person that will treat you in a way that's going to make you my best friend. That's where you don't want ego, but you do want her to be influencing how you meet these requests or this way of being with this other person. And now I forgot the first question. Could you tell me again, Carolyn?
Yes, it is. So I've seen matriarchal leadership from women, which can be as unhealthy as a patriarchal leadership. Can you speak to this dynamic?
Yes. So there is a misunderstanding of the words here. So because a woman is in a position of leadership does not mean that it's matriarchal. Also, matriarchal is often seen as just the mirror image of patriarchy, just with women. The power dynamics are not different. If we're going to talk about hierarchy, and both patriarchy and matriarchy are hierarchies, they're both informed by patriarchy, honestly, that there is one powerful person that is in charge, and everyone else has lessening degrees of power and influence over the group after that one person is in charge. So while it is challenging for women in our current culture to exercise leadership in a way that is not hierarchical. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this sort of collective identity. It's very much a flattening of that pyramid into more of a web of influence. And women are really good at sitting at the center of a web of influence and tapping the lines to make connections and to get things to move and change. And when you're out on that web, you don't necessarily know where that vibration came from. You don't know that it came from the center. It could have come from another area of the web, but the center is always aware of what's happening in the web. So that's kind of more what I'm talking about with the way that women tend to just do leadership regardless of what we've been taught or what sort of system we've been plugged into is, and it's mostly not recognized, this sort of sitting at the center of a web of influence and awareness of making connections, of amplifying others. So we've seen this more and more since the Obama administration, when women would make a comment in a meeting and the men would either steamroll it or steal it outright. Other women in the room would say, hey, you know, that's actually her idea, or she just said that exact thing that you just said. So that's more what I'm talking about. The matriarchy and patriarchy are sort of two sides of the same coin. And we want to just like leave that system aside and seek ways to be more interactive and allowing ourselves to be as influenced as we are influential.
Oh, that's amazing. And we have comments on that. Thank you from Tangela, who asked the question that she loves the web of influence, and Emily as well loves that. And it makes her think how we could do that better at CWI. So I'd love to have that expand on that conversation outside of this. And Tangela says, you should write a book on it. It should be celebrated and studied. I have one, this might be a good, another comment to kind of expand on from Danette. So she said, I have strived to follow the platinum rule with my team for years. Rather than guess how they want to be treated, I started by explaining the platinum rule to them and then asked how I could set them up for success. For example, how do they want to be acknowledged? Introvert versus extrovert, money driven versus something else. What kind of support do they need from me? Especially as a hands-off manager, I recognize that some people prefer more involvement. I was also candid saying that acknowledging their preferences might not be natural to me. So if it seemed to lack authenticity, that was just a reflection of me pushing my comfort level and not an indicator of insincerity.
I think that's wonderful. How has that worked?
Ooh. Danette, would you like to comment?
Yeah, that is a very courageous way of engaging with your team. And yeah, congratulations on that courage and way of making your team, your colleagues rather than the people that you just boss around.
Danette, I have promoted you to panelist. If you want to speak into that, you are more than welcome to on your experience with that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. Actually, I was nervous throwing it out there, especially because I started out saying, look, this is making me vulnerable because I'm showing you where I'm not strong. And as a leader, obviously my inclination is to feel like I have it all figured out. And the feedback I got from everyone was remarkably positive and excited. Because many of them, I think most people have heard the golden rule, but very few have actually heard of the platinum rule. And it actually got them thinking about the way that they prefer to be treated versus others. And so they said, well, I'm going to start extending the platinum rule to my coworkers. So they were all very appreciative, and it actually opened up another level of dialogue, not only between me and them, but also between them and their peers, such that we were all aware that when you treat someone differently than they want to be treated, sometimes it's not an indicator of your lack of respect for them, but rather your lack of awareness of how to treat others that's different, that others that are different than yourselves in any number of ways. So I've been very pleased, and it's been funny. Sometimes they will, and I empowered them. I said, look, if I'm not following the platinum rule, please call me out on it, because then you're holding me accountable for what I have asked you. And they do it. And I deserve that. And I want that.
That's wonderful. I'm curious, Danette, beyond the positivity and the communications of your team, how has this affected the outcomes for your team? So the expectations that the organization has for your team to produce, has this made a difference in that area?
Well, we are a small nonprofit, and in terms of their production or productivity is probably a better word to use. I think it has been, that as well has been very positive, because it takes some of the drama out of second guessing how we're engaging with one another, and then allows people to truly focus on how they can contribute. And it has contributed to a level of collegiality that has actually increased productivity. And I venture to guess, I mean, without having survey data to prove it, that they are more satisfied because they feel like they are in an environment that is really looking out for them individually, as well as part of a group. So, you know, that may be purely speculative on my part, but I have not seen any adverse effects from even the sometimes sloppy and ugly attempts to do it.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really happy to hear that. I know that the biggest financial impact for any nonprofit is turnover. And that could be, you know, one of your primary measures is if your people are staying beyond the 6 to 18 months that is the usual stint for a nonprofit staff member. I think that is going to be a good indicator that you're on the right track.
Well, we are very fortunate, not only being in the electric utility industry, which tends to have a pretty long shelf life from a career standpoint, but we went through a pretty significant staff turnover in the past 3 years with a corporate leadership change. And I am the longest tenured on my team at 20 years, but I have team members that are 15 years, 10 years, and fortunately, even the newest team members are approaching 3 years with no indicator that they're planning to go anywhere. So, and that is part of that has been a very deliberate process, in especially for the new folks, and honestly for those that have stayed, that those that weren't the right fit, encouraging them to find opportunities that were a better fit for them, and then going through a process that was very selective in making sure that our corporate culture and environment were going to be an incubator for their success rather than and it was a much more extensive process, but it has paid off.
Wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you, Danette.
Well, if anybody else has any other questions or comments, please either raise your hand or put it in the chat. I'd be happy to promote you to panelists like we did with Danette if you have an in-person question you'd like to ask at this time. All great questions. Love this topic.
I have a question for you. Talking again more about the friend, and I'm loving hearing the word colleague too, comparative. It makes me think of like my kids. My kids can't be my friends because I won't be able to be the best mom possible for them. So can you just dive in a little bit more into that? And I know that we've talked about this a good bit, but how fear comes involved in the connection process of it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just dive into that? Because I think that's really important to also to just bring it more home on the two, because sometimes at first I'm like, I have to be their friend. They have to like me. But in reality, you do have to lead them as well.
Right. So thank you, Emily. This is a huge challenge for women in our culture because, and I'll just put it really frankly, whether or not particularly men like us is a matter of life and death in way too many situations, even today. So don't feel like you are weak or a pushover because it twists your stomach when someone doesn't like you. You are literally reacting to a life or death situation. So I'm just putting that on the table. That is something that we all struggle with, whether we're aware of it or not. So as we're moving into different roles in life, and I like, Emily, that you brought in, your children, as you know, whether we are biological mothers or not, women tend to take care of people, and the people that we are caring for we have different relationships with them. We have different kinds of love. We have different kinds of fear when we're relating with them. And it's not that when you move into a supervisory role that you are going to become unlikable. You can potentially still be liked as the supervisor, but it's going to be in a different way. And as you are having conversations with your team and going through a grieving process, so this is another important aspect, is understanding that relationships are living things. And when a relationship ends or changes in such a fundamental way as going from colleague to supervisor, there's going to be a grieving process as people go through missing the relationship that was, coming to know the relationship that is emerging, and it is going to take some time. Understanding that this is going to take time, and to be kind with both yourself and your team members as you're going through this is important. I think too often damage happens when this process is steamrolled or ignored. And working forward in, like, similar with being a mother, you know, your kids can have, you know, hundreds of friends, particularly on the Facebooks and social media, however we want to define friend, but they only have the one mom. I'm fortunate, I have two moms. I have a biological mom and a bonus mom, but you know, our moms are fairly limited. The same with quality supervisors. In the organization, you have usually one immediate supervisor where you can have multiple colleagues. So understanding that the relationship has changed, and it can still be one of affinity, it can still be one of collegiality, and that is a concept that I think is worth some exploration and conversation with teams. Understanding, excuse me, that we all go through this, and it is okay to have feelings about it, is, I think, a good way to approach it.
Thank you so much for that. And if y'all couldn't tell, do you see why she gets my wheels spinning every time? And I said that in the beginning. So bright, and just thank you so much, Dr. Elisebeth. I know that we got one more comment, Caroline, if you want to put that one out too.
I would love that. So this is from Martha again. Could you come back to sincerity? Where do you think it's missing most often among women leaders? When is it most advantageous to emphasize sincerity? Could being too sincere backfire for women leaders in ways it probably would not for men? All great questions.
Oh, yes. So sincerity in the way that we are going to be free from falsification, that is a tough one for women in a culture and or organization that is patriarchal, that is focused on the way men do things as the way things are done. So women, again, like women leading as web masters, pretty much, is not going to be recognized. So if you sincerely are someone who values that leadership behavior, you may not be recognized as a leader. So if you are ambitious, and I certainly hope everybody in this group is, in wanting to gain power and influence to make positive change in our very pained world right now, you have to kind of play the game a little bit and understand that it is a game, and you can shift the game from one of competition to one of collaboration. I am rather infamous in my circle of friends and family that most table games like Scrabble, I won't play competitively. I don't play for points, but I play collaboratively, having people contribute to really cool words and then coming to consensus at the end of the game. Whatever is the coolest word on the board wins, and anybody who participated in creating that word also wins. This is significantly influenced by my interactions with Native American communities and their way of again, slow processing and collaborative work in the really basic understanding that nobody wins unless we all win. And if one loses, we all lose. So the risks of being sincere in our current culture, obviously there are pockets where this is going to be simpler and smoother, but overall, you are going to be taking some risks. And again, that's why I brought, some fear, understanding of fear, and knowing why this is going to be difficult and what it could cost you, as far as enacting your sincerity in your role. This is important to understand, and it's not an all or nothing thing. You can take, little steps forward in your sincerity, opening up a little bit. It's not an all or nothing switch. So, like having a conversation with your team about how your relationship has changed because now you're supervisor. That's a form of sincerity. Having real conversations with your team about that emotions are part of the work that we do. Emotional labor is recognized in our team, and I am open to hearing conversations about that. Is another small opening that is, if you do it in a particular way, it's not as vulnerable as just throwing out there that I am having a whole bunch of feelings and these are my feelings, and I can't deal with things today because I read the news. Those sorts of things, that's like throwing the floodgates open and just can cause a lot of damage. So think about like apertures or faucets of controlling the flow of sincerity. Sometimes it's not appropriate to be completely sincere in every situation. So this is something where you've got to like test the waters, warm things up, cool things down, and every day could be different. Every day we are different. Every day is different. If 2020 has taught us anything, we do not necessarily know what tomorrow is going to bring. And when you are have that intention around sincerity, genuineness, not being false, it is simpler. And to Danette's point about her team working well together, it is a lot less wearing to be at work when you don't have to guess about your colleagues. So that's also something to consider.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. I think that was just everyone's questions. Thank you for everyone that put in a question or made a comment. What a great dialogue and conversation for us. That is the end of our presentation. We will definitely, here is Elisabeth's information if you'd like to reach out to her. We will, like I said, this will be recorded and uploaded to Thinkific, so it'll be accessible to Thinkific tomorrow. And we are so excited to be able to have that digitally offered to you now. But thank you again so much, Elisabeth. This was amazing. I've been taking notes this entire time. Everyone else is saying thank you. I know you can't see the comments, but we just really appreciate you so much for speaking. And if you have any questions, go right ahead.
Oh, and I just one more thing, as far as me writing the book about Web of Influence, somebody already did it. Sally Helgesen, Helgesen, wrote a book on women's leadership called Web of Influence. And her latest one is about how women rise. I highly recommend it.
Amazing. Tangela, I will send you those titles to you. Well, that will be it for today. Just real quick, I would like to be able